Hello, and welcome to our first session on racism, learning, dialogue, and healing in a context of faith. I am recording this presentation after our event was held because we had a disruption and we were not able to use the original recording. So we won't have any participants on this recording. My name is Joan Plumley. I've been a member of Good Shepherd Parish for many years. And we will do some learning tonight on the history of Blacks in America. When we think about learning, we often think about getting new information or new skills, but there's another element to it as well, and that is letting go of old understandings or misinformation or limited understanding. So we invite you to embrace learning in its fullness. Our focus for this series will be on the Black experience in America. While we denounce racism in all of its forms against Latinx peoples, Asian Americans, Native Americans, or discrimination of any kind, we will direct our attention to the Black experience in America due to the events surrounding the death of George Floyd and others while in police custody. And sadly, recently there's been another tragic death of a Black man, of a police officer in Minneapolis on Sunday. I think we are at a watershed moment in our country at this time. There's a lot more momentum, more positive energy for change in the area of racial justice. Before going any further, I would like to acknowledge that this presentation comes to you on the ancestral land of the Menomonee Native American tribe, part of the Algonquin language family. We honor their elders, past and present, and we thank them for their stewardship of this land. You may be wondering what led us to initiate this series. For me, it was as I was writing my final paper for a program at Loyola University Chicago over the summer. My topic of jail and reentry ministry was related to race, so my professor suggested I read an article by Father Brian Massengale on white privilege. He is a Black Catholic moral theologian and priest from Milwaukee, currently teaching at Fordham University in New York. Father Massengale suggested holding a series on racism at the parish, and so I took him up on it along with my wonderful team. But there is more to my story, a much more personal story. As much as I love my family, who were practicing Catholics, I grew up in a working class racist family. My dad had a derogatory name for every ethnic group. He said Blacks, not his word, should go back to Africa. My mother held racist views, but she was not as vocal. My grandmother, our landlord who lived downstairs and the owner of 2 duplexes, refused to rent to people of color. As a child, I remember an incident when a Mexican family started to move in next door. When she made the rental agreement, she didn't realize their ethnicity, but it was evident as they were moving in. She got very upset. She went over there and hollered at them until they left. I did not think it was right, but it did have its influence on me. And I'm ashamed to say that I participated in her landlord discrimination. As a young adult, I helped her keep a Black man from renting the flat below ours by lying to him. She asked me to show him the place and have him write his name on a bogus waiting list. As he filled out the information on the list, I could see by his face that he knew what was going on. After he left, I said to my grandma, "You should rent to him. He seems like a nice guy." But she refused. I didn't realize the gravity of my actions at that time. But now I know it has been one of the biggest sins and regrets of my life. I know that God has forgiven me and that God uses all things for good, even our sins. I feel a God-given call to work toward eradicating racism in any way that I can. I have long had a passion for social justice, and now racial justice has taken a focus. Our goal is to help build an inclusive community of racial justice and peace. I know a big part of working for racial justice is inner work. Before I started this project, I thought I knew about Black history in America. My eyes were opened. There's still a lot more to learn. In Mark's gospel, there is the story of Jesus healing the blind man at Bethsaida. The first time he tries, the man can see, but the people are walking around and they look like trees. Jesus tries again, and this time the man sees clearly. The story is a symbol of the gradual enlightenment of the disciples. We don't see things all at once, but over time. In a sense, we all have blindness. As Franciscan priest Richard Rohr says, we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. Making change really means doing the inner work, a lot of self-reflection, and asking ourselves the hard questions and taking those to prayer. In this series, I invite you to join us in seeing in new ways. Now I'm going to share my screen and bring up the PowerPoint presentation. All right, we've already done the first three here. So we will pray together. I'll talk about a definition of racism connected to Catholic social teaching, and then the history through a podcast called 1619. 1619 was the year that the first slave ships arrived in America. Of course, that was before we even became a country. And then we will do the closing since we don't have our participants here tonight. I invite you to take a deep breath and to settle yourselves on the outside and on the inside, and be aware of God's presence that is within us and all around us. God of love, mercy, and justice, we come together before you as people of faith to address the evil of racism in our society. Help us to listen to one another with respect. Open our eyes, ears, minds, and hearts to greater awareness and understanding of the harm caused by bias and prejudice. Let us do the uncomfortable, hard work of self-examination to see how we have become enmeshed in systemic racism that violates human rights and dignity. Fill us with courage and fortitude to take decisive action to create communities of equity, unity, love, and peace. We pray through your Son, Jesus Christ, with the power of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Here's the definition of racism that we're using. It comes from the Ignatian Solidarity Network. Racism involves one group having the power to carry out systematic discrimination through the institutional policies and practices of the society and by shaping the cultural beliefs and values that support those racist policies and practices. The first principle of Catholic social teaching states that all human beings are created in the image and likeness of God. This comes from the book of Genesis. We're all human. The Catholic Church proclaims that human life is sacred and that each human person is the foundation of a moral vision for society. The Catholic Church proclaims that human life is sacred and that the dignity of the human person is the foundation of a moral vision for society. This comes from the United States Catholic bishops. Pope Francis says, human dignity is the same for all human beings. When I trample on the dignity of another, I am trampling on my own. So when we hurt another, we're really hurting ourselves. Okay, here begins episode 1 of 1619, The Fight for a True Democracy. It is narrated by Black journalist Nicole Hannah-Jones.
It's quiet out here, the seagulls. The sun is warm, but it's not too humid. It's actually kind of a great day for fishing. That's why it stinks.
Yeah, what does it smell like?
It smells like dead fish. It smells like the water.
What is going through your head right now?
I don't know. Thinking about what they went through. I don't know. I just wonder a lot what it was like. They say our people were born on the water. Occurred, no one can say for certain. Perhaps it was in the second week or the third, but surely by the fourth, when they had not seen their land or any land, so many days that they lost. It was after the fear had turned to despair, and the despair to resignation. The resignation gave way, finally, to resolve. They knew then that they would not hug their grandmothers again, or share a laugh with a cousin during his nuptials, or sing their babies softly to sleep with the same lullabies that their mothers had once sung to them. The teal eternity of the Atlantic Ocean had severed them so completely that it was as if nothing had ever existed before, that everything they ever knew had simply vanished from the earth. Some could not bear the realization. They heaved themselves over the walls of wooden ships to swim one last time with the ancestors. Others refused to eat, mouths clamped shut until their hearts gave out. But in the suffocating hull of a ship called the White Lion, bound for where they did not know, those who refused to die understood. Women, chained next to them in the dark, no longer strangers. They had been forged in trauma. They had been made black by those who believed themselves to be white. They were headed equals slave. So these were their people now.
That's your Happy Valentine's Day, Nicole. This is a tape for Nicole.
Hello, darling. How you doing? Excuse me while I partake of this cancer stick.
That's okay.
When I was a child, my dad always flew a flag in our front yard. Our house is on a corner lot, and in the front yard, right in the corner, was this, I couldn't tell you how tall it was. It always seemed really garishly tall to me at the time. There was this very tall aluminum flagpole. My parents didn't make a lot of money, so our house always had paint chipping, and there was always something about the house that was in disarray. You know, the grass was looking disheveled, or the railing on the stairs was falling off, but the flag was always pristine. As soon as it started to show even the slightest tatter, my dad would replace the flag with a fresh new flag. He would never allow a tattered flag to fly. And I didn't understand it. I didn't know other Black kids whose parents were flying a flag in their front yard. I knew lots of white people who flew flags. Lots of white people who flew flags. My dad was born on a sharecropping farm in Greenwood, Mississippi, where his family picked cotton in the same cotton fields that enslaved people had picked cotton not too long before. That county, Laura County in Mississippi, lynched more Black people than any other county in Mississippi, and Mississippi lynched more Black people than any other state in the country. So it was a pretty devastatingly violent and hard place to live. My dad's mom fled the South like millions of other Black people during the Great Migration and came north to Waterloo and found many of the same barriers that she had sought to escape. She was forced to buy a house on the Black side of town. Most jobs were unavailable to her, so she cleaned white people's houses. My father went to segregated schools. And at a young age, my father joined the military so that he could get his way out of poverty, but also for the reasons that so many Black people joined the military, which is he hoped that if he served his country might finally see him as an American. He loved being in the Army. He was stationed in Germany, picked up German very quickly. He was so smart. He loved talking about that time. It was a period where he got to see things that poor Black child born in Mississippi would not normally get to see. But the military didn't end up being a way out for my dad for long. He was passed up for opportunities, and the only jobs my dad ever worked were service jobs. He worked as a convenience store clerk or a bus driver. And because of that, this big, pristine American flag flying in the front of our yard was deeply embarrassing to me. And I didn't understand why he would feel that much love for a country that clearly did not love him. I felt this way all through high school. I was no longer standing for the national anthem. I had stopped saying the Pledge of Allegiance. And really, throughout most of my adult life, I mean, clearly I know I'm an American. I was born here. Every family member for generations back that I know were all born here. But I never felt like I could claim fully that I was an American. But it wasn't until I really started researching and reading and thinking about this project that my own thinking started to shift. That I realized my dad understood things that I never knew. I now understand for the first time why my dad was so proud to fly that flag.
My name is Fountain Hughes. I was born in Charlottesville, Virginia. My grandfather belonged to Thomas Jefferson. My grandfather was 115 years old when he died. And now I am 101 years old. Now, in my boy days, we were slaves. We belonged to people. They sell us like they sell horses and cows and hogs and all like that. Have an auction bench, put you up on the bench and bid on you, the same as you're bidding on cattle, you know. But still, I don't like to talk about it because it makes people feel bad, you know.
It is June of 1776, and Thomas Jefferson, at the very young age of 33 years old, has been tasked with drafting the document that is going to declare to the world why the British North American colonies, the 13 colonies, want to break off from the British Empire. He goes to Philadelphia and rents 2 rooms on the edge of town along the river and sits down to draft what we all know now as the Declaration of Independence.
When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers...
So he's sitting at this portable mahogany writing desk that he carries with him, and he pulls out some paper and a very nice quill pen, and he starts to write these words that almost every American can recite by heart.
Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident.
We hold these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
That all men are created equal.
They become some of the most famous words in the English language.
That they are endowed by their Creator with certain
unalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty,
and the pursuit of happiness.
Life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. That's what makes us unique. That's what makes us strong. The shared values that we all hold so dear.
But what most Americans don't know is that while he's writing these lofty words for liberation, he had brought with him one of the many enslaved people whom he owned in order to serve him and to keep him comfortable. Now, that enslaved person was a teenager, and that teenager was the half-brother of Thomas Jefferson's wife. What that means is Thomas Jefferson's father-in-law had children with one of the women that he enslaved. So actually, he was Thomas Jefferson's brother-in-law. And so as he's writing these ideals, he knows that they will not apply even to his own family members. The time that Thomas Jefferson is drafting the Declaration, 150 years have passed since those first Africans were sold into Virginia. The slave population has grown from 500,000 people. Fully 1/5 of the population is now enslaved. Grown from a conditional institution where some of those first 20 were able to become free after a term of time, to one where Black people are born into it, they die into it, and they pass that status on to their children. We now have generations of Black people who have never known a day of freedom and who will never know a day of freedom. And yet, Thomas Jefferson's contemporaries talk in public about why the colonists need to be free from England. They refer to themselves as slaves to the King of England. So the colonists are being criticized in newspapers for this obvious duplicity by those who don't believe that they should break off from the British Empire. One of them writes, "How is it that we hear the loudest yelps for freedom from the drivers of Negroes?" Another writes to Benjamin Franklin, says, "Perhaps you should ask the people who are actually enslaved what slavery is like." Thomas Jefferson, of course, is deeply aware of the hypocrisy and aware of the criticism of the hypocrisy. So as he's drafting the Declaration, he includes a passage in there where he actually blames the King of England for introducing slavery into the colonies. He calls slavery a crime, and he says that the King of England committed this crime, but that's not our fault. It was not our doing. This is just one more thing that the King of England did to wrong us. So he brings this document to the Continental Congress, and it doesn't take long before delegates from the Carolinas and from Georgia look at that language about slavery, and one can imagine they said, "What the hell are you doing?" And they say that there is no way that they are going to sign this document as long as that passage about slavery remains. And so it is struck. And the 13 colonies sign the Declaration. And the Declaration goes out into the world without mentioning slavery at all. And we start the Revolutionary War. Somehow, miraculously, these 13 scrappy colonies managed to defeat one of the most powerful empires in the world, and we become a new nation. And so the colonists gather and they try to figure out the language that they're going to create in the founding document that we, of course, come to know as the Constitution. But now they have a problem. They were trying to leave behind an old country that they believed was antithetical to freedom and create a new one that they believed would be defined by freedom. This was a country that was going to be based on individual rights, on a government of the people, for the people, and by the people. But this was also a place that at this time was still practicing the institution of slavery. And so the colonists have a choice to make. Are they going to be the country of their ideals, the ideals that they were putting to paper, a country based on the idea that all men were created equal? And if they were going to be that country, then they were going to have to abolish the institution of slavery. Or were they going to be wedded to the institution of slavery because they depended so heavily on the wealth that was being generated from it? And in that case, they can't really write the document that they want to write. And so what they do is they decide that they're going to try to have it both ways. And they bake that contradiction right into the Constitution, both codifying and protecting the institution of slavery, but never actually mentioning the word. And so they have written what is perhaps the most radical constitution in the world. And from the beginning, they knew they were going to violate its most essential principles. They called this new country a democracy, but it wasn't one. Not yet. On August 14th, 1862, Abraham Lincoln invites 5 free Black men to the White House for a meeting. They are part of the Black elite in Washington, D.C., and he wants to have a conversation with them. The Civil War has been going on for about a year, and Abraham Lincoln is worried because the war is not going well. And because it's not going well, he's feeling like he might have to do something drastic. He's considering taking this very radical step of liberating all of the enslaved people who are in the Confederate States. And he's thinking about doing this as a war tactic, understanding that if he takes away the South's labor force, that might cripple them, or at least the threat of it would force them to remain in the Union. But he's also concerned about what it might mean to suddenly free 4 million enslaved people and what the consequences of that might be. I can imagine these 5 distinguished men are very excited to get Lincoln's invitation. They are abolitionists. They have been pressuring Lincoln to abolish slavery. But when they get there, they are greeted by President Lincoln and another man. His name is James Mitchell. Now, James Mitchell is a new employee. He's only been at the White House for a couple of days, and his job is a new job, and it's called Commissioner of Immigration. Now, that's immigration with an E, meaning his job was not to help people to enter the country, but to help people to exit it. Lincoln doesn't waste any time, according to documents that recount what happened that day. He tells the men that he had gotten funds from Congress to ship Black people, once they had been freed, to some other country. And then Lincoln said, "You and we are different races. Your race suffer very greatly, many of them, by living amongst us, while ours suffer from your presence. In a word," he said, "we suffer on each side." We are taught to think of Abraham Lincoln as the great emancipator, and he was. But the truth is, like many white Americans, he was opposed to slavery because it was a cruel and unjust institution in opposition to this nation's ideals. But he was also opposed to Black political and social equality. As he said in a speech that he gave in 1853, he considered Black people a, quote, troublesome presence, and that they were incompatible with a democracy that was designed for white people. As he said in that speech, "Free them and make them politically and socially our equals? My own feelings will not admit of this, and if mine would, we well know that those of the great mass of white people will not." As those 5 Black men stood in the White House, I wonder what it must have felt like. These men had been fighting for the liberations of millions and had waited for this moment, only to be told that once they were granted their freedom, they were going to be asked to leave the country of their birth. And to make it even worse, Lincoln then tells them that it's their fault that the country is fighting a civil war at all. He says, "Although many men engaged on either side do not care for you one way or the other, without the institution of slavery and the colored race as a basis, the war could not have an existence. That's why," the president said, "it is better for us both, therefore, to be separated." So Lincoln ends the meeting, and one of the men tells him that they will go back and consider his proposal. Lincoln then tells them, "Take your full time, no hurry at all." After that meeting, those men made it clear that they were not interested in taking Lincoln up on his offer to leave the country of their birth. There's a quote by a different group of Black abolitionists that really sums up the way that most Black Americans felt. And that quote said, "This is our home, and this is our country. Beneath its sod lie the bones of our fathers. Here we were born, and here we will die." Everything that Black Americans have been through in this country, that they didn't immediately take up Lincoln's offer and go somewhere else and start over, is really an astounding testimony to their belief in the American ideals. By choosing to stay, Black people were saying, this is our country, we are American, and we're actually going to work to make these founding ideals a reality. And in the years that followed, after the Civil War ends, a very short period called Reconstruction began. And so you see the formerly enslaved pushing their white allies in Congress to start to change our founding documents and to actually resolve those contradictions that were baked in. They do this through getting amendments passed. And of course, amendments are the way that we change our Constitution. So, of course, the very first amendment that they have to pass is the 13th Amendment, which abolishes the institution of slavery. And what's interesting about that is this is actually the first time that the word slavery is mentioned in the Constitution, is in the amendment that finally abolishes it. They passed the 14th Amendment, and the 14th Amendment guarantees that all of the enslaved people will finally be citizens of the country of their birth. It also ensures for the first time that the laws cannot treat people differently based on their race. This is called the Equal Protection Clause, and this clause will be used again and again, really all the way up until now, to guarantee that all Americans are treated as equal citizens. And finally, they passed the 15th Amendment, which probably is the most important amendment when we're considering what a democracy is supposed to be. The 15th Amendment guaranteed the right to vote no matter what your race is. Now, it didn't include women at that time, but it certainly set the stage. And it, for the first time, guaranteed that whether you were born a person who was enslaved, whether you're white or you were black, you had the right to exercise your vote in this democracy.
And this is our closing. I use this quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Jesus is the light of the world. The light of Jesus helps us see truth. The greatest commandment is to love God and one another. Lord, let us see every person as a human being created in your image and likeness. Strengthen our faith. Help us to broaden our view. Help us to act with love to all people of all colors. We thank you for coming tonight. We ask you to continue to come the next 4 Tuesdays. Next Tuesday, we will continue the story of the history of Blacks in America. Our presenters will be Rudy Gutierrez and Gillian Parham. And we hope to see you then. And please spread the word, invite others that you know to come. And we thank you very much for being here. Peace be with you.